Welcome back to Psychology of Peace Building. Last week, I had promised to talk more about some of the research about predicting violent conflict. It's really important you know this because there's a lot of talk about mental health and violence. And really, there's not a lot of research that links mental health with the kind of tragic violence we're seeing in our schools and communities right now. What the research says is easy access to weapons is definitely one of the indicators. Sadly, military service is also one of the indicators. Too many of our service members, and if some of you have served, thank you, but you get training in violent conflict, right? That's exactly what you're educated, that's your social learning in the military. Having a childhood where you have experienced violence, where you've been abused, physically, verbally, emotionally, yes, it is linked to violence. But the good news is only 40% of us who experience violence as children grow up to become violent as adults. Sadly, Putin is a horrible example. The Russian leader, Putin, is a horrible example of that. Hitler, the German leader, and the Russian Holocaust and the German Holocaust are some of the most horrific genocides. Both of those leaders were example of abused children who grew up to be horribly violent. Actually, Putin is an example of cultural spillover and social learning in many different ways. I'm not going to be able to go into it because I just want you to know that that is something, if some of you have had that before you have children, or if you already have children, if you have some of that trauma in you, I strongly recommend you reach out for psychological counseling and therapy to heal. Because what parents do is they will pass on unconsciously, not intentionally, unconsciously, the trauma that was done to them as children unless they actively work to heal. And I know many parents who are just so devoted to not treating their children the way their parents treated them. And I applaud all of them, but we all can benefit from therapy and healing. I once had a student get very offended that I was recommending that students seek help and therapy, but we all need support and healing with our mental health. Not just a few of us. That's delusionary to think that any of us are exempt. Certainly, alcohol is linked with violence, and abuse of alcohol is linked with violence. There's no question. All of you know that from your party experiences, right? It can unleash violent monsters in people who would normally be quite peaceful. Certain drugs, and I don't need to name the drugs that are linked with violence. Most of you are aware. They definitely bring out a propensity for violence. Sadly, we have legalized marijuana just as we're starting to research the effect of abusing marijuana and the paranoia that you see growing in the United States linked with gun ownership. Oh, it's lethal combination because abusing marijuana can, increase anxiety and paranoia. If a child has been violent and cruel towards animals as a child, certainly that is a red flag to pay attention to. So those are the things I want you to be aware of that are linked with violence. I had a student recently whose father fit most of the criteria, and he was threatening his children and his wife. And I advised her to put her own safety first, to not play around with that kind of dangerous situation. Okay. Trained incapacities, I've already talked about. We all have them. You know, if we grew up with violence, we have been trained to lose tempers and explode in anger in inappropriate ways, and need to learn how to manage that and create a trained capacity. We can actually create a situation that we're afraid of if we're not careful and aware. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's say, you know, I'm paranoid because I've been abusing, you know, marijuana, and I'm looking around me with suspicion at other people. The way I treat them might actually cause them to treat me in the way that I'm afraid they're going to treat me, right? Do you get it? That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The way I'm treating them is going to create the situation I'm afraid of. So we can be our own worst enemies if we're not aware. Gender research, I started to talk about it last week, shows generally that men are raised to be competitive while women are raised to be meek, to not protect themselves. I'm absolutely appalled with how many women do not assert boundaries, physical and psychic boundaries, to respect their space, don't stand up for themselves. I'm trying to be part of the solution and teaching all of you alternative, peaceful empowerment tools. Okay, I think this is enough for now. Take care.